Hey, welcome into the Across the Bar podcast here. We're joined today by the one and only, the man, the myth, the legend, the Heath Cline. That's right. He is off in the big city now. He left us little folk here in Columbia, and he's been doing big things in Atlanta. But it's always fun to talk to you. I go way back to this July will be 10 years at WNKT for me, and you were quite responsible for getting me over there. Our little late night dinners after South Carolina basketball games and covering that, and we'd head over to I think it was the Chicago pizza place, and I'd grab a beer and you'd grab a pizza, and we would discuss the game and have a good time.
Is old Chicago still there? You telling
Old
me?
Chicago, it's
Okay.
still kicking around. Yeah, it's making.
Okay, it's still there. All right. There's a lot of places I know that aren't there, so I had to be sure on that one.
Yeah, it was. It's the Vista's fighting. It's holding its own, but I think they did the Garnet and Black tour, whatever they're calling it, fest, with Tony Annan and with Shane Beamer. I don't know if Lamont Paris was at the most recent one, but they did it at a new place over by Segra Park called Gather Columbia, which is like a huge food court. I actually have never been, and the funny thing about that is when they did that last night, they actually Clemson was doing their their tip tay run or whatever. They were right there on the same facility at Segra Park. So you had South Carolina and Clemson wrapping up their spring tours on the same night, not in the same town, essentially within a quarter of a mile of each other, basically about half a mile there over at the new Bull Street district with Segra Park and Gather Columbia.
Yeah, it's wild because I'll see stuff. Obviously, I'm still in touch with lots of people over there, but I'll see stuff about what's going on. This place is closed or that place is open and whatnot. And the last time, Bill, I was physically in Columbia was the night Aaron Rodgers tore his Achilles.
Oh,
That was
geez.
I found out about that as I was driving back to Atlanta from there that night. I haven't physically been in Columbia since then. I think I've only been in South Carolina like one time since then. So it's wild. It's a huge part of your life basically for 15 and a half years. And then suddenly kind of poof, it's gone. And I'm sure at some point I'll be back over there, but I just haven't had anything that specifically has brought me back that way. So it's just kind of wild to have known about all this stuff that was going on intimately for so long. And then now it's just kind of like, oh, wow, that's closed, huh? Crazy. So I'm glad old Chicago is still around.
So just to be clear, the Fireflies are not an attraction. The 4-8 football team couldn't draw your interest. The 3-13 basketball team couldn't quite grab Heath Cline's interest, and the baseball team also this year has not been able to attract you over for a game.
I'm not going to lie and pretend that I have been envious of the work that you guys are having to do in the current environment for Gamecock athletics. Yeah, man, it's been wild. That first year was so strange for me though, because that was the year that Paris and those guys did go on the amazing basketball run. And so you know me, I love to cover basketball. And here I am, I did 15 plus years in Columbia and I got one NCAA tournament run in 15 years. And I'm watching, I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I'm gone, and now is the time that something like this comes together and that they put this amazing run up. And obviously, it didn't work out for them. I hated that draw for them with Oregon. As soon as I saw it, I said, "Oh, I don't like that draw." But I would have definitely been there in Pittsburgh and curious to see how it played out. So I was pretty envious that year what was going on. But yeah, since then, again, I guess football had one kind of magic year too. But since then, there have been plenty of days where I kind of looked and said, I miss the audience. I appreciate everybody who listened, but I got to be honest, I'm not super envious of you guys trying to crank out some topics on this today.
Yeah, it's I'm trying to think. Tomorrow or today, I guess, will be pretty interesting. I will get into Ted Turner a little bit. The unfortunate news that you and I talked about earlier with Stephen Garcia. There are some other things. The Kentucky. Again, our market. You know who we deal with. Trying to offer more than 2 minutes on Golden Tempo, skipping the the Preakness in 2 weeks. You can hear the sound of the channels being changed. And quite frankly, for about another 3 weeks until Memorial Day, we're speculating on all talk regarding the baseball search, which is fascinating. And then football, they're relatively quiet right now. You don't get some of the stuff that we used to. And then basketball, and I'll go back to basketball with you. You have seen this transfer class. You saw last year's class, and I don't know if you saw my tweet the other day. The 7 guys who transferred out have all officially found homes. Cam Scott will go to Temple, Elijah Strong to St. Louis, Eli Ellis to Charleston, Christ to Sandaco goes to Bowling Green, Abu Yarman goes to Longwood, EJ Walker goes to Western Kentucky. I think that's all of them. I think I rattled off 7 there. I might have left one out, but none of them moved up. What was your take on that transfer portal class? And when you hear that something like that, where nobody moves up, and then you see Lamont Paris bring in these guys, and I don't know how much you paid attention to these guys, but do you give him the benefit of the doubt, or because he's failed miserably, by the way, 3 out of 4 years so far, and he brings in this class, would it give fans hope? Would it give you hope?
Well, I mean, look, it happened once. So if it happened once, maybe it can happen again. The one thing is, at least supposedly, they've had more resources to work with. Now, I don't know what that looks like in terms of, if you up it $1 million, how much does that help? $2 million, how much does that help? Part of it, you've got to just allocate it correctly, but more resources, whatever that translates into, can they get more effective players? I will say the kid from Alabama, I'm not going to pretend like, oh, wow, I've been digging deep into this, but the kid from Alabama that they just picked up sounds like exactly the kind of guy, if I was a fan, I would want them to be getting. A guy who was a top 50 player originally, didn't get on the court a lot at a place that has a lot of high quality players. That doesn't mean he's not a high quality player. It just means in a year where they're contending for big things, maybe he's not quite ready yet. But for South Carolina, where you can give him time, maybe he'll make some mistakes, but the talent clearly is there. If a guy like Nate Oates wanted him, there's obviously ability there to be interested in. That's the kind of guy, if I'm a fan, I say, okay, I can buy into the idea maybe there's something more here than what we've had.
Yeah, it's been interesting because, and I don't know the exact reason. You can say it in just a second that you didn't like the Oregon draw. I didn't like it because that team in particular for South Carolina, they were high IQ basketball players, but they weren't good athletes, and they got exposed against the high athletic teams like Auburn that year. I think Alabama that year kind of got them. I think Auburn cranked out 1 20-point victory and a 30-point victory in that season. And then I don't remember if the third one was in the SEC tournament or not. So I didn't like that. And then the following year, after the NCAA tournament, it seemed like Lamont tried to go more athletic with Jamari Thomas, with Nick Pringle, with a few other guys, and that didn't pan out, obviously. That team couldn't get together. They had Colin Murray Boyles as well. So he went back to his foundation this year, which wasn't athletic, and they turned out to be bad shooters. And that's a bad combo when you're in a league like the SEC.
Yeah, I mean, watching that Florida game, I mean, you're just saying, what in the world? Like, how is this looking like this? I mean, it's just hard to understand how it could be that ugly. And the biggest thing, I think, if I'm a fan, that concerns me is I know that my coach may not always be able to get the team that he wants. I mean, especially now. You can have a great relationship with a kid, have evaluated him well, and somebody may just come in and drop an extra 200 grand on him, and you lose. It's as simple as that. We used to talk so much about the shoe companies. We don't hear near as much about the shoe companies these days, do we, Bill? Because
No.
They have a role, but now it's a different world when it comes to how these guys are being apportioned out. And so the thing I guess I do go back to is this, though. Where I knew Darren Horn wasn't going to work out at South Carolina was I knew what Darren Horn basketball was supposed to be. It was supposed to be pressing. It was supposed to be up tempo, and it's year 3, and they're playing a bad 2-3 zone, playing it poorly on top of it. But there didn't seem to be a plan. There didn't seem to be anything resembling what it was supposed to be. If Lamont Paris is getting the basketball team of his dreams, what does it look like? I think it looks like Wisconsin when Wisconsin's good. We know he played there, or worked there rather. And I think that's just the kind of players he seems to like, guys that would succeed at Wisconsin. Do you think the best Wisconsin teams would consistently compete in the SEC? I don't know that they would. And that's the thing that would concern me, is that I feel like his vision of what in his ideal world he has, I'm not sure it's a great fit for what the SEC has year in, year out. I'm just not sure it's a fit of Guy and what he likes as a basketball coach and what he has access to in the South, first of all. But even if you can go buy it somewhere else and bring it in, I'm just not sure it's how I would suggest trying to win in the SEC.
you got to put it, and I've talked to some people about it. When that was working at Wisconsin, you also had guys that still didn't have the leverage to transfer out, and so, or in the manner that they do now. And I say that because you had guys that developed into older players. I'm blanking on Frank Kaminsky, and then the other power forward, and then they had the point guard. And I covered all of them. Bronson Koenig, I believe, and then who the power forward who was good, who's his first name was Sam, I think.
Sam
Uh,
Decker.
Sam Decker. And so, with all that being said, those guys didn't have to contribute so much as freshmen. They were allowed to develop in that system. Whereas now, I mean, he's flipped this roster. You got say at least as we know it to be right now, 6 new guys coming in. He's bringing in, at least from what we know, 3 international players. So you're trying to run a system that's a little complicated. Now go back to the 26-10 season, or 26-8. They had that Bahamas trip that allowed them to get a few actual games in and practice over something like legitimately practice. And I think that's one of the big problems. You're right. You have to have a system tailor made to dealing with guys coming in and having to learn on the fly, and it can't be that complicated.
No, and look, maybe they'll start making more trips because now they've changed the rules, so you can go every
Right.
year. So maybe that'll help a little bit on that. But look, I just go back to uh, resources are fine, but you've got to get the evaluations right. And if you look at this Florida team that was a number one seed last year, national champs the year before, not a single one of those guys that they brought in from the outside was some super high profile player in the group that was the champions. And then Boogie Fland obviously was a little different when they brought him in this past year. But they did not build that team with a bunch of guys who were top 100 recruits. They did a great job of evaluating guys like Chinyalu and realizing what they could be, and also finding some kids out of high school that could turn into really good players for them. So, uh, look, maybe Florida allocated more for basketball than South Carolina, but I don't think you can look at that and say what Florida was able to do without a bunch of top 100 kids and what South Carolina's been able to do and say, well, it's just a matter of a checkbook. Some of it is better evaluation and maybe better coaching too.
What is, at least now I know you said you hadn't studied, and we'll move on after this. What is your impression so far of this coming year? If I asked you right now to speculate just on what type of, we don't know the schedule yet. We don't know how he's going to, let me ask you this actually. Let me go back on this. I have now I've started advocating. You know how South Carolina basketball is in November. All right. Nobody's going to show up. And now when you come off these 2 seasons, apathy is probably at its highest I've seen since even even I think the end of the Dave Odom era, there was more apathy than the end of the Darren Horn era. It was close. Those 2 were close. I have said in that opening game this year, see what you can do to get a marquee name. Now, it doesn't need to be Kansas or UConn, or obviously Duke and North Carolina won't play them. You don't need one of the top 15 teams in the country. Go see if you can get a Maryland who's coming off a bad year. Florida State is coming off a bad year. I know Miami made a big run, but maybe you can get Jay Lucas to bring that team up here. But get a name brand team. Get a name brand team. Get them to Colonial Life Arena. Let's be honest. If you lose, you lose. Nobody's going to say a word. If you beat them, Heath, I think it starts to draw just a little attention to you, that maybe you can get some fans going for the rest of the non-conference that gives you somewhat semblance of a home court.
I mean, if you could get a team like that to come play, it's always a good idea. I mean, so many times it's been hard for them to get teams in there that fans would want. And even if they did, it seemed like they always got them at the worst possible day. Like I remember they had Memphis one year. I think it was like January 2nd. Didn't they get like Michigan, but it was like the day before Thanksgiving? I mean,
Yeah.
I remember that there were some times where even when you got guys to come and play you, it was always like the worst possible time to do it. And so, yeah, if you could pull it off, that'd be great. I'd say give Georgia Tech a call, because while Georgia Tech
Georgia
has
Tech.
as big a brand name as some of them, I'll tell you at Georgia Tech was horrendous at basketball this past year. And while their new coach may help improve that, I would suspect that that's an ACC name brand team that would be a gettable opponent early in the season if they could get them over there. So I don't know. You want me to pull some strings over here? Let me know. I'll see if I can talk to somebody.
I have said for a long time, South Carolina has an affinity for playing North Carolina in football and North Carolina State. I'm really always shocked as I've gotten older now that in my what I would say my true watching experience, that like, granted I'm not counting the 80s, that I haven't seen South Carolina and Georgia Tech play a non-conference football game. Now,
Remember, they
obviously,
had a series they'd agreed to, and then they canceled it.
yeah, and they scheduled that when Paul Johnson was still coaching, to which we thought that's an awful idea right then. But yeah, they did schedule. But I mean, even basketball. I don't know when the last time they played Georgia Tech home and home in basketball, and I would think that's something that you would try. They did play them in the NIT. They played them in the NIT and got beat. That was the season that all those guys got caught up with the BB gun stuff. And then in baseball, I think they've scheduled one game maybe that was played at the North Augusta SRP Park. But you don't even schedule them for much of anything in baseball. And I know that you've got the Clemson series and the way they schedule, they don't want another big name team. But it's always surprising to me that we haven't seen more South Carolina Georgia Tech matchups over really the last 30 years.
Well, Frank Martin actually had Georgia Tech agreed to for a
I
home and
do
home
remember that.
series, and then somehow Brian Gregory, this is back when Gregory was the coach, somehow something went weird at the last minute, and like they sent the fax and the fax didn't get returned or whatever it was. But Frank Martin was pretty hacked off because he actually thought that was going to be a good series, that home and home that they had scheduled with Tech, and then somebody on Tech's end did not fulfill what they had agreed to, and so it never happened. But yeah, I mean, there's talent over here, obviously, in basketball, and plenty of Gamecock fans in Atlanta. So yeah, I would think this would be an example of a home and home you could book that would be a fun trip for fans if you could do it on the weekend, especially. I think it'd be a great idea.
The rest of that story is actually, at least as I heard it from the staff, the only reason they found out that the Georgia Tech game wasn't happening is because Tennessee put out their schedule, and the Georgia Tech game was on the same day as South Carolina was supposed to play Georgia Tech, and yeah, that led to Frank being not happy. But that's how they found out that Georgia Tech had changed opponents or done something, because Tennessee, I think, put their schedule out, and sure enough, Georgia Tech was playing Tennessee, and South Carolina basketball figured out it wasn't going to be a split squad game for Georgia Tech. So that is a thing. Well, we'll see. I will ask you real quick your thoughts on the upcoming season. What would be fair expectations?
Oh, I mean, Bill, I'd be lying my tail off if I acted like I put any thought on what they could do. Because, like you say, the schedule's not even out yet, and I'm drowning in college football every day. But uh, you have to say, okay, it can't keep looking embarrassing. Like even if they can't make the tournament, let's just say they can't do that. Even if the NIT doesn't mean anything to anybody now, if it ever really fully did for people, you just can't be getting embarrassed. That's the biggest thing. More often than not, when you go on the court, you need to give your fans 40 minutes where they feel like they had a chance to win, and you need to win some of them. I don't want to make it sound like if you lose, go 4-14 in conference, but lose by 6 every time, it'll be okay.
Right.
But you got to get out of the business of just getting humiliated, just looking like you're not prepared to play, or that your talent is so inferior that it wouldn't matter what you did, you had no chance to win. You got to get out of the business of that. That's a bare minimum expectation, but yeah, I'd want to know more about who else in the conference has done what. That's the one thing, man. The biggest difference for me working in Atlanta versus working in Columbia is that over here, I'm like the college basketball maven, and I probably spend 20% of the amount of time on it that I did when I was there, because we were just so busy with so many other things. And so, like, nobody in my building goes casually to college basketball games. They don't watch the college basketball games very much. I mean, if it's like a huge game, if it's, whatever, Duke and Michigan are playing, okay, maybe somebody will have it on a second TV. But like, they don't pay attention to college basketball here at all. Georgia hasn't been good enough to force them to talk about it. Tech hasn't been good at all in years. So naturally, when you kind of look at it and you say it's going to take one of those programs getting good for it to become a big part of what we're talking about, it's kind of forced me to shift away from it more than maybe I'd like to. I'm no Georgia basketball fan, but I would love Georgia basketball to stop getting to the tournament and then getting humiliated in the first round. Like they finally make the tournament, and in back-to-back years they're down like 20 at the half. Just give me something to begin to get a fire going over here, but it's just dead over here when it comes to hoops talk.
Yeah, I like Mike White at Georgia. I don't know what his ceiling is and if he's already hit that, but I like him, and I think he won't get much pressure, as you just kind of pointed out. He can have
All
a
you need
run
to know
there.
Mike White, Bill. I think Mike White is an okay coach. I think he's perfectly fine to get you to a certain level. I don't think he can do much more than that. And
I
particularly, I look at two things. One, it's kind of wild to think about, actually. Since I was in college, there have only been 4 coaches at the University of Florida. 2 of them have won national championships. One of them has played in a Final Four, and the other guy is Mike White, and he only got past the round of 32 one time. And by the way, who was on his staff when he did that? Dusty May.
Hmm.
So maybe without Dusty May, we're seeing that, yeah, Mike White's, he's all right. But
Well,
all right is about what he is.
I'll say this: in late February, when there was speculation that South Carolina may be heading into the college basketball market, I think it was right there when when Mike White signed the extension, and the buyout went to about $8 million. I think I suggested him as a guy that South Carolina should kick the tires on, and see, because I know Georgia's not offering the kind of resources that it sounds like South Carolina might be willing to offer. And to your point, if Mike White was to make the NCAA tournament 3 out of 5 years here, 2 out of 5, something that South Carolina fans haven't seen since the '90s, where you go back to back years, there would be so many babies in streets named after Mike White that he would be a legend in South Carolina. Whereas in Georgia, like you said, he goes back to back, and people are still like, "Oh, that's nice. What's Kirby Smart doing?" And I don't know if they're looking at what Wes Johnson is doing with the baseball and ignoring Mike White even more. So I thought that might be of interest for South Carolina to at least kick the doors on Mike White and see what they can find out.
Well, yeah, it might be possible that at some point he needs another spot to get to. It's just so funny because this year they drew St. Louis in the tournament. And naturally, because people here tend to think in football terms, like, we're going to own those guys. And I'm like, hey, St. Louis is really good. Like last year, they got Gonzaga and they got destroyed by Gonzaga, but people here knew about Gonzaga. So like, okay, well, they're a tournament team every year. They'd be like, St. Louis, we'll beat those guys. I'm like, know about that. Josh Schertz is a heck of a coach, and they got Kareem Abdul-Jabbar there. They've got some really nice players. They're sound offensively, and I kind of got in the building, got the okay, well, whatever. Yeah, whatever. So after that, like if he's going to lose next year, he needs to at least lose to somebody from a name brand. He needs to get an 8-9 game against a name brand team again, because losing to St. Louis, people are like, the bill of what now? That didn't go over super well.
The home of now Elijah Strong. So really upgrading in that portal. All right, well, let's move to you mentioned it. Y'all obviously Heath Cline with us talking all kinds of sports, some Gamecock, and right now we're just going to talk SEC football. I know that's what you and Chuck are constantly into on a daily basis. And as we've wrapped up the spring practices, and now we know the destinations for all the transfer portal guys, and we're getting a little bit better idea of what's going to be coming the SEC's way in 2026. Your overall big picture thoughts on the SEC going into August, and then when games start in September.
I think it's really interesting how much people are assuming Ole Miss is going to stay pretty close to where they were. That surprises me. It surprises me a lot. And Lord knows I'm not the biggest Lane Kiffin fan in the world by any stretch of the imagination. I thought what he did last year is a perfect example of why I would never want Lane Kiffin to be running my football program, because you cannot trust him to keep his eye on the ball for 12 games. You just can't. He's going to find a way to make it about him. He's going to find a way to have drama when there's no need for drama. I would not want him running my football program. However, if you are Ole Miss, the facts are, without Lane Kiffin running your football program, you have not had anything close to the level of performance that you did with him running your football program. And now it's like, okay, we're going to just assume that Trinidad Chambliss will continue to be the same level of player with a different offensive coordinator. We're just going to take that as an article of faith. I love what the kid did last year. Super impressive. Does that mean that he's going to mesh with a new coordinator from ECU and everything's going to be awesome? Maybe. I don't know. But I don't think that the talent level at Ole Miss is so overwhelming that if there's any slippage at all on that offensive side of the ball, they're just going to make up for it. And Pete Golding as a head coach, I don't know many people who really thought that Pete Golding was a particularly natural head coach possibility. There are Saban assistants got plenty of jobs. Have you ever heard anybody before Pete Golding got that job ever talk about Pete Golding for a prominent job? Because I didn't hear anybody talk about that. Maybe a Louisiana job or something. But in terms of power conference job, I didn't hear that. So I just find it fascinating that people are acting like Ole Miss. Oh, yeah, they'll just be a top 10 team again. The quarterback's back. Oh, okay, we'll see. Does Pete Golding know how to run a game? I know Pete Golding knows how to call a defense. Does he know how to operate the clock and run the game? I don't know that. I need. It's one thing to maintain. Now that you're putting your stamp on a team, What's that going to be looking like? I'm really curious about that. Lane's got plenty of talent at LSU. He'll probably have a good first year, although the fact that Sam Levitt hasn't participated at all in spring and that he's got a bad foot and that just heard from Arizona State people, they weren't exactly brokenhearted he was leaving. I do wonder about that, about how he'll do and how quickly he'll fit. But they've also added some good kids behind him. Houston Longstreet, if he had to be quarterback, and he's a pretty highly touted kid, maybe he could just jump in and take over right away. So I'll give Lane benefit of the doubt, even if Levitt doesn't work out, that he'll have a pretty good offense. We'll see whether or not he can get them back to the playoff right away, but I think they'll be pretty good. And what about Sark, Bill? Sark has had back-to-back good years, but now this year, you went kind of out of nowhere and brought in Will Muschamp to be your defensive coordinator. I don't know what that was about. Pete Kwiatkowski did not do a bad job as their defensive coordinator the last few years. You bring in Will Muschamp, who hasn't been running a defense as a primary play caller in a while now, and you've got Arch for probably one more year. You've added Cam Coleman, who's an elite level talent athletically at receiver. Like, there's no reason this team shouldn't be expected to be one of the two best teams in the conference, playoff team, and maybe more than that. Can Sark handle that? Maybe he can. I'm just curious. That Muschamp move just seemed really weird.
I have said with Steve Sarkisian that maybe, look, Shane Beamer's going into year 6. Last year was embarrassing. It was bad. I'm not questioning that. I'm not saying he's not on the hot seat. And I'm not saying Steve Sarkisian is in danger of losing his job, but we know the resources and the financial aid that is given to Texas football. And it's not there to just make the college football playoff, and it's not there to win just 8 games or 9 games. It's there to be a national championship team. I think this is a huge year for Steve Sarkisian. Again, I don't. Let's just say they bomb out and they go 8-4. I don't think he's getting fired. I don't think he's getting fired. We're to have a million injuries and they go 7-5. But I think you look around the league, and Kalen DeBoer is a guy that's being watched extremely closely, and I think Steve Sarkisian is there. I think it was Bill Conley in an ESPN article that put Shane Beamer as one of his coach, with the most amount of pressure on him in the country, and I didn't agree with it. None of them put Steve Sarkisian. So I think it's interesting with Texas. LSU, to me, I'm with you on the Sam Levitt thing. That was really built up, and was Sam Levitt the one that was really strange, where he was at a Tennessee basketball game supposedly, and he was texting with Lane Kiffin? Am I right on that? Which quarterback was that?
Yeah, he was at a basketball game in Texas. I think he was next to Lane actually when it was going on, because like Lane was trying to get somebody else, and then he wound up.
Okay, maybe that was Lane was trying to get somebody else, and it was during that time. Yeah, but anyway, I don't know. I don't know on Sam Levitt. What are your thoughts, real quick, on Clemson LSU to open the season? Because Dabo yesterday, was it yesterday? I think did the interview. I saw. I didn't get a chance to really pay attention. Actually, I think it was Tuesday he did it. But he had the chance to. He talked about his team and said that basically they don't have the financial resources or the aid of Alabama or Ohio State or Georgia or the other teams that they've beaten along this road to where they are at. And this is kind of a prove-it year for Dabo, and now they got to open up in Death Valley against Sam Levitt, Lane Kiffin, and that talented LSU squad.
Yeah, I would assume LSU will win the game. Remember, Clemson's now lost 3 straight openers, and not only have they lost 3 straight openers, they barely scored in 3 straight openers. They 7 points against Duke, 3 points against Georgia, and then last year I think 10.
14. I thought they got 14. You could be right though.
They have not been able to come out of the gate with a hot offense. Now, hey, you've got a new coordinator, you've got a new quarterback. Maybe that will change, but the reality is everybody looks at Dabo and says, is this somebody who can adapt to modern college football, for better or worse? I mean, you don't have to like it, but for better or worse, things have changed. They've changed in a big way. And for a guy whose whole stance is my culture and the way I do things, this is why we do it the way we do here. This is why I've gone and brought back a Chad Morris. I went outside my comfort zone and brought in a guy in Garrett Riley who wasn't from here, and look what happened. I'm going to go right back to old and familiar with Chad Morris, even though Chad Morris hasn't had a good year coaching anywhere since the second he left SMU as a head coach. But I'm going to bring Chad Morris back in here because my way and my people, that's how we do things around here. I just think you look at it and you say, what evidence is there that doing it that way, that whatever culture you want to say they've got, is superior right now? Because 9 kids drafted, 7 wins. And some of the kids that were supposed to be those cornerstone players, Will Helt, the guy they took as a transfer from Purdue, had a better year than these guys who are getting drafted in the first and second round. He came in hungry from the outside, not a part of the Clemson culture. The Clemson culture kids are the ones that fans are kind of like, I don't know, Peter Woods doesn't seem to have quite the same fire in the belly I expected him to this year. So it was just a really interesting time for him to double down on the idea of my culture, my way. This is how it works, because nobody I've talked to over there seems to love Christopher Visna as a quarterback. I have yet to find anybody who's like, he's going to be way better than Klubnik. Look out. Like it was easy. Now, they were wrong, as it turned out, because Klubnik did not turn out to be the level player they thought he was. But you remember, Bill, everybody would tell you, oh, the problem was DJU. Klubnik's going to be great. You don't find people saying that about their quarterback situation now. I like what they've got at tailback. I'm surprised they didn't get more out of Gideon Davidson last year than they did. But I think they've got some players at tailback. So maybe you can go to a heavier run dose. Maybe things will click. But I don't think the place for them to click is likely to be at LSU week 1. And remember, they got Miami week 5. So that means unless you win one of those games that people don't see, you winning right now, you're certainly going to be an underdog in both those games. That means you're off to a 3-2 start. And that's at best. That's also with a Friday game at Cal. And Cal's got a new coaching staff, but Cal's also got a good quarterback in JKS. They're dangerous on a Friday night like that, out on the West Coast. That's a tough spot for Clemson to be. So let's just say, hypothetically, lose to LSU, lose a close one at Cal, lose to Miami, and you're 2-3 again. Even though the second half of the schedule is pretty accommodating, I mean, Bill, if they're 2-3 and 2 losses in the ACC, the season's over for them. And how are people going to respond when that happens? If it does again, because it's not hard to imagine how you get there at all.
A lot of good thoughts there, Heath. Always appreciate that. Let's move to South Carolina here for a minute. A lot of people talking about the Kendall Briles hire. How do you see this playing out in his frame? What is such a vital year? You saw the development of Lenora Sellers under Dow Loggins, and then over in Atlanta, you saw what Dow Loggins became under Mike Shula and how that year went. So how do you see Kendall Briles as the new offense coordinator, and how do you see that connection and that compatibility with his offense and with Lenora Sellers?
Well, I'll just say this, first of all. I would not have hired Kendall Briles, because if you followed what happened at Baylor, I just wouldn't want a guy associated with it, period. I wouldn't have brought him in because of that. But obviously plenty of programs since have been willing to do that. I'm just saying, me on a personal level, I would not want anyone affiliated with that staff, affiliated with my program. But choice was made. He's in there. The fact that Shane Beamer has made it this deep into his college career as a head coach, and this will be the first time that he has ever had an offensive coordinator who was calling plays at another college the year before, is kind of wild to me. And yet that is reality. It's his 4th offensive coordinator, but it's the first time that he's hired somebody who has been calling college offenses the year before. And I think that's going to help immensely. I think that Briles, you hear from TCU that maybe it was time for him to move on anyway, that he and Dykes weren't necessarily on the same page, and that Dykes had a lot to do with what they were doing offensively. Certainly, if you look at what Kendall Briles has done at other places, there were some things that TCU was doing that were not exactly the same. So I think maybe Briles gets a chance to get back a little closer to how he likes to call things, and I do think he knows how to call an effective offense. And look, I'm a Bucs fan. I saw Mike Shula in Tampa Bay. I saw that movie. I knew what that movie was. Mike Shula is a really good quarterback coach. Do not let him call your plays. Period. Do not let him call your plays. There was no reason to believe he was going to be any better at it this time around. I understand the desire for continuity and a guy that had a relationship with Lenora Sellers. I get why they thought it would make sense. Bill, I'm so glad that I did not have to be on the radio over there trying to tap dance around, because you know the vibe. I mean, they could hire, pick your guy. They could hire a random coach out of New Mexico or New Mexico State, and if he came on and seemed like he was a sharp guy, people, oh, this guy's got the goods. He'll be a good offensive coordinator. No one wants the negativity until it goes bad, and then they want you to crush them. For me to have to be on the radio for 8 months before Mike Shula called his first play, trying to be fair, trying to be somewhat optimistic because that's what fans expect, while knowing I don't like this idea at all for South Carolina, that would have been tricky. So I'm glad I didn't have to dance that particular dance, because having watched him with Tony Dungy, my Lord, I just don't know why they thought that was a good idea.
I will say, and I don't know how much you really kept up with it, the way the Illinois game played out, and what happened to Lenore Sellers in that game, where he looked so different, so entirely different than the young man that had to come back against I guess the comeback they were losing, but the game against A&M, the game against Missouri, and obviously the game against Clemson. Things were so bad in that ball game that you might not have had to tap dancing around it that much, because so many people so quickly went, wait, what is this guy going to do? What is this offense? Okay, let's just hope. Like, the hope became, let's hope that it was a bowl game and that he was trying to run a system under Dow Loggins that he wasn't completely familiar with and didn't have time to coach Lenoris in the manner that he needs to be. There was a lot. I don't want to say a lot of like, excuse making, but it was more of a hope of like, boy, if what happened against Illinois is what we're getting, this was an awful hire. And sure enough, it ended up being that what happened against Illinois carried through to whenever he was fired, whatever game that was. I think Mississippi, I believe, might have been the game. But anyway, it is
another thing too, Bill. I like the fact they bring Randy Clements with him. I think that having an offensive coordinator and a line coach who are on the same page, that understand the system and understand each other and how they work, I think that will help them a lot. We all know South Carolina's offensive line has been largely a sore spot forever. Brief moments of success in the Spurrier era there. And I guess you could say the second half of the second year of Spurrier, that offensive line did pretty well. And then a few years of success when the team as a whole was having success at a high level. But overall, I mean, how many years, Bill, you've followed this team certainly longer than I have. How many years have you ever said, you know what, one of the absolute strengths of this team is the offensive line? It's just not a thing you say about South Carolina football. And way too often, it's not a big strength. It's the glaring weakness. So I don't know if he can wave a magic wand and make this line more effective. But having somebody who, at least I know that he's in sync with the offensive coordinator and what he needs when they're evaluating kids, I think that has to be helpful.
We will find out. He's got some guys to work with. They're bringing in, obviously, Jacarius Peak is out for at least. I would hold him out for at least the Kent State game. You shouldn't need him on the season opener. That gives you another week until September 12th, and you play Towson. And quite frankly, you shouldn't need him for that. Now, if you want to get him some reps in there just to get him greased up and ready to go, that's fine. But week 3 against Mississippi State here in Columbia, that's the one you're going to want him to be in. That Mississippi State game seems like a 7 o'clock, 7:40, whatever time it runs, SEC network game. So we'll see. So that'll be a big game, and then you go to Alabama in week 4. So certainly you want him back and up and running. Jacarius Peak. So Randy Clements can look at his offensive line and see what he does. Barrett Miller is likely going to be the starting center, and that'll be pretty interesting. And then Shed Surratt is the lone returnee, and where he goes, maybe left tackle to fill in for Peak, maybe the right tackle full time. All of it, Heath, is going to be. I have been very explicit that I am not. Show me. I'm not buying any hype. I'm not buying into this or that, and nobody does. It is a show me season, and I will say, when you look at that schedule. When we go to this, you look at that schedule. Look, I mean, there's a lot of toss-up games. I don't know what Florida is going to be under John Summerall. Maybe he's great, maybe he's not. I don't know. You get a bye week, and then Tennessee comes to town, and that's vital to have a bye week going into the Tennessee game. How does Oklahoma look this year when you go back out there? Is Texas A&M still able to maintain what they were? And you get them here in Columbia as well. And then obviously the kick stretch there of Georgia here in Columbia, and then that road game at Clemson. To me, there's a lot of games. And then throw in the Kentucky and Mississippi State games, which I think Kentucky's a toss-up. Mississippi State's a toss-up. Yeah, you should win those games. There's a reason to have expectations. There's a reason also to understand this team can be greatly improved and still only be 7-5. And in the Texas Bowl, which is what I saw Brad Crawford put out the other day.
Yeah, look, I want to see Lenore Sellers just get a chance to actually play football without being under duress from the second the ball snapped. I mean, it was last year was just asinine. So I just want to see that kid get a chance to actually be an effective football player in a way he simply did not get a fair shot at last year. I want to see him and what he can develop into with just the ability to actually have a second to read the defense before he's getting hit by somebody. And I hope they can give it to him because I think the fact he stuck around is not something that should be uh, devalued. I mean, there was a check waiting for him somewhere for sure if he wanted it. And it would have been real easy for him to take it. I don't think anybody would have been surprised had he taken it because that's just what you expect from college athletes these days is this idea, you're Darian Mensah. Duke gave you a 2-year deal coming out of Tulane for $8 million. Oh, wait, I can get more? Bye. That mindset is just so out there now that the loyalty he showed after just being destroyed over and over and over last year, no time to operate at all. I think that he deserves that, and so I hope they can give it for him. I'll tell you this though, Bill. Florida, I think Florida is going to be fascinating this season because I think Billy Napier did a dreadful job at Florida. I can't emphasize enough how bad I thought he did as their coach, and I think John Sumrall has come in with the mindset and energy that can wake some of those people in that program up pretty clearly. DJ Lagway, you can blame the injury if you want to, but DJ Lagway was not an effective leader for that team last year. I don't know how good Aaron Philo is going to be in the SEC. I haven't seen him there yet, but I saw enough of him at Georgia Tech to know in Buster Faulkner's offense, Aaron Philo is a really good fit, and he understands the offense already. He's got some excellent athletes to work with. They're still trying to figure out tight end, but the wide receivers are excellent. Javon Ball is as good a back as there is in the conference. I think Florida could be a bear for some people to deal with this year as long as Aaron Philo, I don't know if he'll be amazing, but if he's just all right and an effective leader while he's all right, I think that plus what they've got on offense, I think they could be a problem for some people.
All right. Well, we'll continue to talk about that. We got still about 3 months until college football season, so we'll definitely get back together and do this. Let's go national for a second. I'm interested. You follow stuff and cover it really well and stuff like this. What are your thoughts on this Texas Tech Brendan Sorsby gambling issue when you see just everything coming out? You covered football for a long time. Gambling amongst college players is not new. The coverage of it, I think, is.
Yeah, I mean, look, if the NCAA sticks by the principle that we expect them to stick by based on what they've done in the past, and if you're the NCAA, you just want to enforce any rules, right? Anything at all that could stand up. I can't imagine they let Sorsby play. Now, Sorsby has hired a guy in Jeff Kessler, who's one of the most well-regarded attorneys out there. He's been more effective on things like antitrust. I don't think there's an antitrust issue you can raise in any way about why the NCAA would say we're not allowing people to play college football that have bet on their own team. And you say, well, but it was only the first year, and it was at Indiana, and he wasn't even playing that year. It doesn't matter. The rule is extraordinarily clear. You are not allowed to bet on your own team, period. You're not even allowed to bet on sports at your own school. Like if he'd been betting on Indiana basketball, that would have been a problem for him. And so with what's been reported that he bet as a freshman in Indiana on the Indiana football team while he was a member of the team, that's supposed to be game over. And it was game over for the Iowa State quarterback. So there's not really a case to be made of, well, he's being treated differently. Like so many of these cases have been won by people saying, well, this guy got a waiver and this other guy got a waiver, so it's been applied unfairly. Well, there's no examples I'm aware of where someone has been proven to have bet on their own team and still allowed to play. So if Sorsby plays, it's going to be because either that attorney is good enough that he's able to threaten the NCAA and they say, you know what, let's give him a half-season suspension negotiated and at least not have to go to court and spend a bunch of money and maybe have us lose this case too, and the rules get even less effective than they already are. But I assume, based on what's reported, he's not playing. And for Tech, that means Will Hammond, their quarterback that got his ACL torn last year, better be healthy enough to go and play effectively by the third week of the season. The one thing I will say, if you look at their schedule, Bill, Big 12 is not that great a conference to begin with. And if you look at their schedule, in the first 6 games, there are only 2 games. There's a Friday night game at home against Houston, and there's Arizona State. Both of those games are at home, too. those are the only two of the first six that I would say there's any scenario they should lose. Like they'd have to work to lose the other four. And so if he does only miss a half a season, or even if Hammond takes a while to get back and get healthy, as long as when Hammond is healthy, he can be an effective quarterback, there's no reason Tech couldn't still win the Big 12 without Brendan Sorsby. It's more about what they could be after the Big 12, where maybe you feel a sense of drop off if they don't have him.
We'll get there. You and I will continue to talk about this. Certainly, we're going to continue to do this a lot more. I enjoy being able to sit down with you in this longer format. We're at about 45 minutes now, so won't keep much more of your time. But I do want to kind of quick thoughts right now, real quick. Obviously, earlier this week, Stephen Garcia posted he's got stage 4 colon cancer and is battling that. You were here for his arrival, everything that took place in his dismissal. One or two just thoughts on his on his career, on a game that stood out. Obviously, Alabama, talk about that, but just one or two thoughts on Stephen Garcia at the University of South Carolina, and a game or two that caught your attention.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the Alabama game will always be the signature moment. I mean, still the only win over a number one team in program history, and just an unbelievable performance. And that's the thing with Garcia that always stands out, is that you always kind of wonder what would have happened had he been able to just avoid some of the factors off the field that would keep him from being the most effective player he could be. Now, it's part of why he's been able to kind of trade off the legend of Stephen Garcia for 15 years too, as a guy that did it on the field and did it off the field, whether we're talking about the stories about the Peach Bowl in Atlanta after the 2010 season and girls in the room, or some of the other stories that come up along the way. Yeah, he was a truly unique character in a lot of ways. I mean, never had a spring practice, as I recall.
I've one. I've gone back and looked at it. I had to dig it back up. I can't remember which one it was, but there is a video of him I've seen throwing a football in a spring game.
And yet none of the things that got him into trouble were ever, like, the worst thing he ever did probably was key that professor's car, but it wasn't like he was out committing acts of violence or getting arrested for thefts. It was always just, Stephen, what the heck? What do you mean you screwed up at an etiquette ceremony? What? Like, it's an etiquette ceremony. Just pick the napkin up when they tell you to. Use the seafood fork and get on with your day. What are you doing, Stephen? But that's the thing. If he had been more of a quote unquote bad guy, as opposed to just these moments like that fans were just kind of like, oh, come on, that I don't think people remember him as fondly. But obviously when he was on the field, a guy who had some special moments, effective leader. You think about that ECU game. I came back into that game. Connor Shaw starts that game up in Charlotte. They're way behind, and then Garcia comes in and helps lead them back. He wasn't the only reason. You had an Ace Sanders punt return. You had some other factors in that game why they came back, but it was that kind of moment, that idea that, hey, Stephen Garcia might be able to pull this thing out of the fire, even if he's part of the reason you got in the fire in the first place. It's a special memory for a lot of fans. And I just remember when we did we did the 30 SEC years of Gamecock football and the top 30 players. And I was the one who ran that whole thing. And Garcia literally was the 30th player in the 30 years of Gamecock SEC football history as voted by the fans. And I remember that's probably the last time I actually talked to Stephen was interviewing him about that. But I remember when I reached out to him to let him know, hey, this is a thing we've done, and you were voted number 30. And so we'd like to get you on the air to talk about making the top 30. Like, there was some actual emotion with him. Like, it meant something to him that the fans had valued him enough that they had put him in that group of being the 30 guys the fans voted. So, you obviously wish nothing but the best for him health-wise. I mean, it's kind of incomprehensible to think that both he and Connor Shaw have had major health scares within the last year or so. And then obviously Steve Tannehill has passed. I mean, you sort of assume that these guys, being athletes and whatnot, that they're going to be the guys who live to 75, 80 and always be around. You don't anticipate those kind of guys getting major health scares, and yet here we are. And so I'm sure at some point Stephen will will tell his story more publicly than what's known right now of just this being discovered and that there's a crisis that he has to deal with health wise, and loads of people stepping up to contribute and help. So I'll be curious to hear kind of how it played out. What was the process like of him finding out? He's alluded to the idea that, hey, get yourself checked. If you're not feeling 100%, don't be afraid to go to the doctor, which men as a whole have always been bad about. You don't want to go to the doctor and he kind of gives you the, oh, seems like you're okay to me, and you feel like a wuss. Bill, you might know something about this subject. I don't know. But that's the thing. It is important to take care of yourself, and guys have a history of not doing it. And so maybe this is a thing where Stephen Garcia kind of becomes a public face of that too, that, if there's anything that feels a little off, don't take it for granted, go and do it. Because I can tell you, I had a buddy that thought that he had strained a muscle in his back weightlifting, and kind of was like, whatever. And it turned out to be testicular cancer that was somehow not on his testicles. They had like spread to other parts of his body. And so he had like major issues, including it was in his brain. And, he strained my back, and it took weeks. I don't know if he'd gone the first day it happened, if it would have made a giant difference for him, but it might have helped. But it's just natural. It's a little pain, deal with it, put some dirt on it. We got to be careful, because that can get you in a really bad spot sometimes.
I don't want to eulogize Stephen. He's still alive, but you just mentioned something I thought about today, and you left off another prominent Gamecock quarterback. Probably, if we were to rank just fan affection and then what they did on the field, obviously Connor Shaw, Steve Tannehill, and Garcia would be up there, and the fourth, I think, would be Phil Petty. Yeah, and absolutely. It's crazy to think in my lifetime, the three different quarterbacks of the decades of 90s, 2000s, and now the 2010s have all had, and then you mentioned Connor Shaw, but unfortunately two have passed away, and one is in a significant battle, and thoughts and prayers with him and his family. Before I let you go, another guy who lived a great life passes away this week. You're over in Atlanta now. I know there's a lot of things happening to remember Ted Turner. I'm sure when they get back to Atlanta, they're taking on the Dodgers this coming weekend. They actually Braves just lost their first series of the year to the Mariners yesterday. You're a little bit different. You grew up in Florida, right? Am I right on that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Tampa for me.
Yeah. Okay. So you didn't really grow up a Braves fan per se, but did Ted Turner impact? I talked about it today a little bit in a video where I basically said, hey, Ted Turner's passing. If it wasn't for 7:05 Braves games and WCW on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I don't know where I would exactly be. Those were fond memories of my lifetime growing up. I was also saying, like, the Braves Dodgers, for me, like it always felt like it was more often the Giants, but they would play the Giants and the Dodgers on the West Coast on a Friday or Saturday. And growing up between the ages of about 8 and 14, my dad would let me stay up and watch the games, and that was always a treat. One, as a kid, you're staying up till 10:40 or 10:30 or whatever, and you're getting to watch baseball, and I'd fall asleep on the couch. And then WCW, I'd wake up the next morning and come running downstairs at 7:05 a.m. and watch the end of Bonanza and watch WCW. Did he have any impact on your life and the way he kind of transformed cable television?
Well, just a fascinating man. I mean, honestly, on so many levels. I mean, but just this year, here it is. The Braves unveil the new City Connect uniforms, and on the sleeve, you've got the ATL in the style of the old TBS logo, because there are so many people that is cornerstone experience for them growing up. The reason that Dale Murphy is so beloved by so many, yes, he was a really nice player, but it was that he was on those teams in the 80s where people were seeing so many of their games because they were on. In Tampa, we obviously didn't have a team. And so you were most likely, if you were not someone who came to Florida with a pre-associated team, to either be a Braves fan or a Cubs fan or maybe a Mets fan, because we had WOR too, with some Mets games. But the Braves were on as consistently as anybody. And if they had been a little bit better in the 80s, then I think it would have been even more dominant, that they would have had a huge fan base. But yeah, it was a cornerstone memory for tons of people. But think about CNN too, Bill.
Yep.
Just creating that, whatever cable news has become, When Ted Turner created CNN, he was trying to have the actual goal of news, of public information, of true investigative reporting, not whatever you think of what this stuff has become. I mean, there is some news presence still on CNN, but it's also just it's pro wrestling now. It's just pro wrestling by guys in ties trying to smack down each other for who's going to get another clip on the internet where somebody puts up a video. So and so destroys the other guy. Yeah, okay, whatever. That's not what his vision of CNN was. His version was actually news and important. And so I mean that, but more than that, I mean, my goodness, the guy put himself in the dugout in uniform to manage a Major League Baseball game. Now, after one game, they said, you can't do that anymore. But I said, how many people have said, if I own the team, I could coach this team? He actually did it. Went out and won the America's Cup. Look, I'll say this. I know there's some people who can't stand Jane Fonda. My dad would be, if he was here, more than happy to agree with you about his feelings on Jane Fonda. However, if we are talking about someone to date and marry someone, Jane Fonda was a pretty aspirational move for Ted Turner. Pulled that off too. I mean, what can you say? The guy did everything he wanted, and you don't hear horror stories about him too, Bill. That's the other thing. Is if you talk to people about famous people, about rich people, it doesn't take too long normally for somebody to be willing to share some dark sides on people. You don't hear much of that around Ted Turner. And whether it was, I mean, he started a restaurant serving bison. He cared about bison. He wanted to preserve bison. And then he also said, for the American diet, bison would be better than beef. I'm going to start my own restaurant chain promoting bison. Like, it wasn't, I'm going to get rich with this restaurant chain. It's, I'm going to sell bison burgers. He is the kind of guy that so many people, so many of these tech bros that get rich, and the best thing they can think of to do is, I'm going to buy the Batmobile or something. Like, he did the things. He was the kind of person all these guys out there, like the Elon Musks of the world, kind of aspire to be. And he did it with a sense of style and panache that so many of these guys, with more money than Ted, by the way, but they can't carry themselves anywhere near the same way that guy could.
That's a lot of good stuff, man. A lot of good stuff. Well, Heath, we've been on here for about an hour. That's why I like doing this format here, because I don't feel rushed to get information out of you. We've covered a lot of stuff tonight. Definitely want to do it again next month. Talk a little bit more about the Braves and kind of more college football, narrowed down on the SEC, and even look ahead to the ACC as well. So always appreciate it, and a lot of fun talking to you. I don't know if we've ever done a full hour. Well, I guess we did the pre-games, didn't we? We did the pre-games when you would normally be harassed by somebody walking up at the Carolina Park needing to know where the popcorn stand was.
Yeah, no, we did that. We did some SEC media days, but yeah, we don't get to do too many. Well, heck, I was on the Wednesday, or was it Tuesday or Wednesday? Fun fact: last show I did at 107.5 The Game was with you. Before I had a meeting right after the show, noteworthy meeting after the show. But last time I was on air in an announced non-guest role at 107.5 The Game was with you on the morning show, as it turns out. So yeah, we've done this some before. Always fun to hang out, man.
I'll definitely do it again, buddy. Look forward to catching up, and good luck to you over there in Atlanta.